110 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. We're meeting today for the first time in regards to the incident that took place in the gallery in the House of Commons. And I would like to welcome our guests who are here with us. I also want to note that it is March 21st, 2024, which is World Down Syndrome Day, a day that was created to raise public awareness, promote inclusivity, encourage advocacy, and to support the well-being of those living with Down syndrome. I'm usually in my riding on this day, but today I was not. So Caleb and I shared a pair of socks with each of you, and we hope you'll rock your socks. With that, we'd like to welcome Ihor Michael Shishin, from the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, as well as Yars Balin, Director, Cool Ukrainian Canadian Studies Center with the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. I believe that there was opening comments from one of you, and you'll both be available for comments. So with that, I welcome you both to PROC. I thank you for taking the time to be here, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. We were just having some audio issues, but I hope you can hear me now. So I'll read the opening statement, and then we're available for questions. So on behalf of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, it's a pleasure to be here today virtually to speak with you. I'll just read our opening statement on this matter at this point. So for many centuries, all of the inhabitants who lived on the territory of what is today Ukraine, including the Jewish people, suffered successive occupations by foreign empires and colonizers who sought to subjugate those for whom Ukraine was home. Some 30 years ago, with the declaration of Ukrainian independence and statehood, the difficult process of reaching mutual understanding and comity began and continues to this day. The history of World War II in Ukraine is complex and difficult to easily summarize. Ukraine was caught between the two tyrannies of Hitler and Stalin. In the 20th century, Ukraine was the center of what Yale historian Timothy Snyder has called the Bloodlands. The Ukrainian people fought for their independence in World War I, in World War II, and are now fighting for the freedom of Europe. Without their own state, Ukrainians fought in different military formations, always in pursuit of a free and independent Ukraine and against Soviet Bolshevik Russian tyranny. Following the incident in Canada's Parliament this fall, our community was once again subjected to a familiar disinformation narrative, smearing Ukrainians, which originates with the Soviet Union and is now being used by the Russian Federation. It is unfortunate and hurtful that many ill-informed politicians and members of the media chose to engage with the simplistic and inaccurate narratives instead of relying on the findings of a Canadian Commission of Inquiry. As one of Canada's preeminent scholars of Ukrainian history, Dr. Paul Robert Mikulci, Chair of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Toronto, stated, "There is simply no proof that the Galicia Division engaged in war crimes. The characterization of former members of the Galicia Division as Nazis, fascists, war criminals, or monsters is inflammatory and unsupported by historical record." In the 1980s, the Government of Canada called the commission the Deschênes Commission to investigate claims that thousands of Nazi war criminals were hiding in Canada. The commission found that between 1971 and 1986, public statements from outside interveners concerning alleged war criminals were spread increasingly and exaggerated as to their estimated number. The commission also found that charges of war crimes against members of the Galicia Division were not to be substantiated, neither in 1950 when they were first referenced, nor in 1984 or before the commission. It is the long-standing position of our community that if there is evidence of any wrongdoing by an individual, regardless of who they are or when they committed a crime, this evidence should be brought to the attention of Canada's War Crimes Unit to be pursued in that forum and not in the court of public opinion. As Dr. Mikulci stated, it's not in the interest of Canada for politicians and the media to distort historical past and besmirch the reputations of individuals in order to gain ostensible advantage in the Canadian political arena. The disinformation narrative smearing Ukrainians originates from the Soviet days and is now being used by the Russian Federation in an attempt to discredit an independent Ukrainian democracy. This is an effort to sow division within Canada and other Western democracies. It is an attempt by Russia to distract from the war of annihilation against Ukraine that it wages. which this parliament has correctly unanimously recognized as a genocide against the Ukrainian people. Every day, including last night, Ukrainian cities are being bombed by Russian missiles. Every day, Russia is murdering Ukrainian civilians, abducting Ukrainian children, and committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. It is the defense of Ukraine and ensuring Ukraine's victory over Russia with which the UCC and our community are seized at this time. We invite all members of this committee, all parliamentarians, and the Government of Canada to join us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now enter into 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Comich, followed by Mr. Duguid, et puis Madame Goudreau, suivi par Madame Matheson. We're actually going to do 5-minute rounds, if that's okay. And we'll just make sure, just for a couple of points real quick. One person speaks at a time because we do have 2 official languages. It's challenging because you are virtual and we are in person, but I think you can see the room. So you'll see when a person has finished and we can try not to speak over top of each other. Second of all, we know it's a tough topic. We know it's not easy conversations. So I would just ask that we remember why we're here and we stay focused on the study because we do want to have a thorough discussion and conversation, but it needs to be respectful. And I will do my best to ensure that happens, as I'm sure all members will. Mr. Comich, 5 minutes to you, through the chair.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question will be to Mr. Mihalchishin. We've spoken many times before. You know, I've been to a lot of Ukrainian churches all across Canada for Cowit visa holders, and I've been meeting with a lot of people in the evenings to talk to the Ukrainian community. But I was going to ask you, like, how do we move forward from here in order to avoid events and disagreements between the diaspora communities in Canada, which are 3 which are at stake here. 3 have an interest in how history is interpreted, namely the Jewish community in Canada, the Ukrainian diaspora, the Polish diaspora. My last name kind of gives it away. So how do we move forward from here so that what events that happen here are not used by the Russian Federation to further its propaganda campaign in this war that's happening right now in the territory of Ukraine?
Thank you. And I appreciate the attention that you've been giving to our Ukrainian displaced people and refugees at this difficult time. I think 2 things. I think we have historians, as I've referenced, Dr. Magochi, Mr. Balan, who's with us, and many historians from different communities who are writing the history of these difficult chapters of history and are providing ways for us to speak to each other, to interpret them. And I think the other is, as I've referenced, is to not relitigate the past. That we've had this Deschênes Commission, which was, I understand, a difficult time for communities, you know, in terms of a proceeding and tensions. And I think that concluded in a way that people felt had every community have an opportunity to give its presentation, to hear, to participate. So I think reopening these difficult chapters without the work of academics and reopening, you know, processes that have been concluded is not a helpful way forward.
Can I add something?
Go ahead.
I just want to point out that the Ukrainians and the Poles struck a historical commission in Ukraine and Poland to discuss these painful issues, and that commission is met and, you know, trying to resolve these differences in their views of history and everything. And I think that that's the way to go, to have a calm discussion of it. The biggest concern, of course, is always knee-jerk reactions, emotional reactions to provocations. And if there's some way to, remain focused and calm and not overreact right away to situations like happened with the incident with Mr. Hunka, that would be appreciated by all.
So, Chair, my next question, I'm glad that we brought up these commissions because for the last few years, President Duda of the Republic of Poland and President Zelensky have been doing these reconciliation meetings, masses with the heads of the churches on both sides of the border in Volhynia and in Galicia as well, in recognition of the fact that you have to forgive in order to be forgiven. I think that's what the bishops on both sides have said. That's what both presidents have called for. And so I'm going to reiterate the first question I asked, which is like, so how can we help as Canadian politicians, as Canadians in Canada to ensure that events that happen in Canada here are not used by the Russian propaganda machine to undermine the legitimate right of Ukrainians to have their own country and to keep their own borders the way they want to keep them, their own culture and language, so that events here are not used to undermine their story in Europe, but also internationally, as that really does sap the strength of the Ukrainian people and the government to be able to find new allies and to continue having the same allies they have. So what can we do going forward?
Yars, would you like to go with that?
Well, like I said, the first thing is to make sure that when an incident like this arises, you don't overreact right away. Buy time. I mean, just say we are investigating this and bring the temperature down, because if you react in an emotional way, you're just going to create all kinds of further complications with the issue. So that I suppose is the first thing. In terms of avoiding a situation like this, the whole question of vetting comes up. How do you vet, these invitations or whatever? And that's a complicated issue, and that's on Parliament to figure out. I mean, I'm not sure how you try to vet, given all the people who've come from all over the world with all kinds of backgrounds, bringing all kinds of issues with them. It's not such an easy thing to resolve.
So that's thank you very much for saying that, because that's exactly where we're having this committee study. That's the whole purpose of this, is to look back on how we can improve the vetting. So do you think there's an opportunity perhaps for organizations like yours to participate in such vetting in the future when there are leaders of countries where there is a diaspora that's connected to it, to participate in that type of vetting? And wouldn't you think that in such situations where there is perhaps sensitivity, that individuals who are invited, not be recognized necessarily from the floor of the House of Commons, and that be reserved expressly for unique situations where there are national heads of state and national heads of government?
I think we have a number of experts and historians in the community who could contribute, to those conversations and, participate in reviews of whatever kind of proposed plans there are. I think, Yars, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is possible, to approach the communities, not just the Ukrainian community, there are other issues, I'm sure, with other communities for some input in advance. I think that might be that's what you'd want to do.
Thank you.
So you don't get caught off guard by this.
Thank you. Just in the nature of transparency, that did end up being a 6-minute round. Mr. Kimmich did offer to interrupt, which I asked him not to, which I appreciate of him, and so I said I'll give you that time. That means I would offer Mr. Duguid a 6-minute round, but I'm going to stick to where I was and say it's a 5-minute round. But if you negotiate as nicely as Mr. Kimmich did, I'll consider it, but I'm hoping you don't. So 5 minutes to you, Mr. Duguid, through the chair.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for the time, and a particular thank you to our witnesses, two people I know well and who I've had many conversations with over the years. Madam Chair, just a quick question with a short answer, hopefully, but it's been clear that Mr. Hunka was invited by the Speaker to sit in the gallery and recognized him. On the issue of the rally that was held that same evening with President Zelensky, I wonder if Mr. Michaelishin could just describe the process that happened. My understanding is that the UCC put Mr. Hunka on a list, and the Prime Minister then invited Mr. Hunka. Is that exactly what happened? It was at your invitation, is my understanding.
Yeah, so we were contacted to do a broad invitation to thousands of people in Toronto. So we provided a list of every past donor, volunteer, community organization, board of directors that we had to receive an invitation. I don't know who was or wasn't invited at the end, but his name appeared on the list that we had forwarded, yes.
Mr. Michael Ishin, I think you know that Winnipeg is proudly the home of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. There's another major office in Toronto, as you know. And the UCC hosted a major commemorative event of the second anniversary of the illegal invasion. Over 800 people attended, and I can tell you, two gentlemen on Zoom today, that the Ukrainian community expressed to me feeling absolutely betrayed at the lack of unity of Parliament, particularly directed at the Conservative Party and their vote against the Ukrainian Free Trade Agreement, as well as other supports for Ukraine. And I just wonder if you would comment on how this incident has further fostered this sense of betrayal, particularly as the flames have been fanned on this particular issue. And I know up close and personal that the community is in pain.
Well, I guess I can say, as I said in my opening statement, that there was surprise and hurt that this is coming back again as a disinformation narrative that we've seen over decades, that we're sort of facing it again. In terms of Parliament and legislation, I think everyone knows that we strive for unanimity. We strive to speak with all parties, to urge everyone to support the Ukrainian community and the Ukrainian cause at this point in terms of what they're asking of us in terms of weapons and trade and other things that will help Ukraine win over Russia's war of aggression. So I think it's been, for people like myself, this is kind of one of the first times we've been dealing with this narrative, but I think Mr. Balan and others have seen this over time repeat itself and are surprised that we haven't been able to educate people enough to not go down these paths of disinformation.
So
could I just say?
Go ahead, Mr. Balan.
No, I was just going to say that in connection with the free trade agreement, I mean, one of the things that I always took great pride in as a Canadian is that we had such bipartisan support for Ukraine. And I was involved right at the beginning in the initial negotiations. This was under Prime Minister Harper's tenure, when the initial negotiations took place to sign a free trade agreement with Ukraine. And it's very important for Ukraine, and to see it sort of mixed in on this discussion here is concerning. It's a little bit disappointing. I'll just leave my remarks at that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll finish.
Excellent. 4 minutes and 29 seconds. So there is some commentary that's being offered in regards to what's relevant and not relevant. I think we know this is a greater issue, and there's always been leniency provided. So what I will say to members is that if you like leniency when you're asking comments and questions, then you're going to have to offer that same courtesy to others. But it can't just be convenient for when you want it, but not when others want it. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. It's kind of how it works around here. And if you want to raise a point, do it. But otherwise, as long as we have decorum and we can have respectful dialogue, I'm going to let the meeting function. Mr. Duguid came in at 4 minutes 31 seconds. I appreciate that. 5 minutes à vous, Madame Goudreau, permis la présidence.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses. I would also like to say that today's meeting, and we should say this, is a delicate topic. And for the reasons for this study, and that is the purpose, we want to shed light, but we also want to understand the history so that subsequently we can produce what it is we need so that we never again have a situation like what happened. So factual question by way of you, Madam Chair, for our witnesses. Earlier, our colleague talked about the speaker, saying on February 13th that it was the Canadian-Ukrainian Congress that had provided the list. And we had little detail about who was on the list, but was Mr. Hunka's name on the list? I just want to be certain that amongst all the donors,
was about the event that took place in Toronto on Friday night, and that was an event to which the UCC had was asked to provide a large number of people to attend the rally. We had no involvement and never spoke to the Speaker's office or to the Hunka family about his invitation to Parliament.
Quand, Madame la Présidente, le cabinet...
When, Madam Chair, the cabinet, the Prime Minister's cabinet was asked to provide a list, was there any criteria for issuing that list?
The criteria that we were asked to for the Toronto rally, which is not Parliament, for the Toronto rally, we were just asked to identify community organizations and leaders and people who had been involved in various positions, but I have no insight onto who was invited to Parliament or not.
Okay.
Very well. So if I were to ask the question, if the government chose to invite everybody on your list, you would not know. Is that correct?
That's right. We provided a list of potential invitees, and I don't know which of those people were sent an invitation or not.
Okay.
All right. My next question, Madam Chair. Subsequent to the greetings and tribute made to Mr. Hunka in the gallery, were there contacts with the President or Prime Minister? Any contacts made?
Sorry, were there contact with UCC and the Prime Minister's office? We were only talking to them about the Friday night event.
Donc, après l'événement, il y a...
So after the event, there were no exchanges or contacts with the Speaker's office?
The UCC, we have never interacted with the Speaker's office. We received a letter from him apologizing after a week after, but we had never spoke to the Speaker's office before or after the Zelensky visit.
C'est suffisant pour moi.
That's sufficient for me, Madam Chair.
Très bien, merci. 4 minutes.
Very well. Thank you. 4 minutes, 10 seconds. Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify again, so Mr. Mikol-Shishin, you said, okay, so there's no, the list was very general. You provided it when requested on that sort of generality. There was never any sort of specific drilling down of names. And you don't know who was invited. Can you also let us know in terms of any background checks or any filters that you yourself, the Ukrainian Congress had in terms of any of those lists? There was nothing on your end that was requested by PMO or that you do on a regular basis. There's nothing like that done.
I mean, on the list, we're a small nonprofit organization. We have lists of donors, we have lists of volunteers, we have lists of member organizations, and those are the kind of lists that I have at hand and that I was able to provide.
What kind of timeline was asked for you to provide that kind of list? What turnaround time did you have?
I'm trying to remember. I think we had 3 or 4 days to kind of compile from our Toronto, sort of folks in Toronto area and Ontario who was potentially to be invited.
Okay. I wanted to drill down a little bit on what Mr. Ballin said. So you commented that it's not important it's important for us to not overreact or follow with that knee-jerk reaction when we hear about and we deal with these major incidents. And I liked hearing about that reconciliation effort that you were discussing with Mr. Kmitch. Have there been similar efforts here in Canada to reconcile or go through these sort of reconciliation efforts in terms of difficult histories that we deal with?
Not on a formal basis. If you're talking about with the Jewish community, we have, of course, we interact with the Jewish community, and the subject is still fraught. I mean, the whole subject of the Second World War is still fraught. I should say that in Ukraine, there's been a lot of progress as well within Ukrainian society, that discussions of these sensitive issues is taking place, especially with the younger generation. It's a little bit removed from the immediate situations and sees things more objectively and calmly. But I think that this is something that we can work towards going forward in conducting these discussions in a respectful manner based on scholarly research and shared information to arrive at some kind of improvement in our dealings with this whole issue. There's always room for an improvement. There's no doubt.
We can always do better. That's true.
Yeah.
In terms of those reconciliation efforts, then, and I certainly, I'm trying to combine a couple of questions that I have. I did want to hear a bit more after all of this occurred. And as we go forward, the Ukrainian community in Canada, they are dealing with a lot. So what are the overall sentiments? What happened after, and then how we're moving past that now? But also, I'd like to know, in terms of those reconciliation efforts, who do you think would be best to lead that, or how could, within this committee, as we move forward with recommendations, how could we, as the Government of Canada, support those reconciliation efforts?
I could answer that. I mean, our Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies is in discussions, obviously, with the university administration, and they are in discussion with the Jewish community, and we are working towards some kind of a discussion of a series of research initiatives, discussions on these topics. Nothing final has been decided yet, but there is a sign that there is progress on that, and I'm sure that things will move forward. What we need to do is to take this off the media front pages, because it's impossible to discuss complicated and sensitive issues like this in the daily media. It simply is impossible. So we need to take down the temperature. We need to move it off to the side where a calm discussion can take place. And the academic arena is probably the best place for this.
And just in terms of the both initial reactions and the reactions now from the greater community?
Well, I mean, the community is frustrated. Ukraine is in an existential struggle at this moment as we speak. And this is a distraction. This is as Mr. Mikhalcheshin pointed out, this is an issue that has come back repeatedly, because the Soviet government and now the Russian government has invested heavily in opening these wounds, driving wedges. They've been doing this for decades and decades since the end of the war, and so it's very disappointing seeing a situation arise again where this is blown up. And that is being continually fed even to this day, that articles keep appearing in the paper, rehashing the same issues and not providing anything new, but just keeping the issue in the public, because this serves Russian interests to create this narrative that the Ukrainian government is a Nazi regime, which is absurd, and whitewashes the past, all of this sort of stuff. Simply untruth, but it keeps coming up and up again.
Thank you. Ms. Matheson comes in at 6 minutes and 1 second. All right, so we're going to do a quick second round. Please stay within it so that we can move on to our second panel. They will be 5-minute rounds. And so then I will start with Mr. Kmitch, followed by Mrs. Romanato. Mr. Kmitch, 5 minutes through the chair.
Thank you, Chair. So to both the witnesses, would you say it's accurate that the reason this is making front page news and it's still being talked about today is because the Office of the Speaker in the Prime Minister's office screwed up by not vetting people, by allowing process that is not followed, that is not the usual practice, to have someone recognized in that matter during a state visit by a close ally of Canada?
I mean, I think Vladimir Putin is raising it over and over again. We see, certain media kind of raising it, as Yaris has said. We think that the whole way that the speaker proceeded on this needs to be reviewed, as you are reviewing it, and we're just very unfortunately being pulled into this, along with other communities, into something that's is harmful to all of us.
Sorry, Mr. Michalchishyn, so would you say the speaker was at fault? And this is his fault that the story is still public?
He's written us a letter to apologize for it, so I believe he's taking responsibility for it from what he's written to us.
What about the office of the Prime Minister? Have they written to apologize to you?
No, I have not received that kind of letter from them.
Okay. Then I guess the follow-up question is, has there been any effort made by either the current Speaker's office or the Prime Minister's office in the last few weeks or months to reach out to you? And I won't speak to you whether you know if they reached out to the Polish Congress and to Jewish communities across Canada to do that act of reconciliation, to fix this and fix the reputation of Canada and fix the reputation of Ukrainians across Canada, the reputation of the Polish Congress, of Jewish people. We've all been drawn into a propaganda war being waged by the Russian Federation. And would you say that the blame lies with the Speaker's office and with the Prime Minister's office as well?
So there's a lot of questions in there. I wanted to go back to something Yaris was speaking about, which is the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, which is another community function, another community group that's working on it. I think with the politicization of Ukraine, we really want unanimity. We want the speaker's letter to stand in terms of what his actions were and weren't. And I think that our community is looking to move forward and in partnership with other communities to build a narrative of dialogue as we always have.
So, Chair, Mr. Michalchishyn, so is it fair to say then the Prime Minister's office has not reached out to you, has not communicated with you, and the Speaker's office has not communicated with you since the incident, apart from the apology from the Speaker's office, to try and perhaps do an act of reconciliation in Canada, like the Polish government and the Ukrainian government at the very highest levels have done, including church leaders on both sides, to reconcile with the past, like I said, to forgive and ask for forgiveness, and then to use that as a good news story going forward, because this wouldn't be a non-story if the Prime Minister's office had done its job and the Speaker had done his job. Is that fair?
Well, there's a lot of questions that you've asked me in there. I think that what has happened, as we've said after the incident, is that our community, faced a barrage of accusations and questions in the media. We saw politicians from various sides, but particularly from one perspective, calling this man and our community names. Which has upset us a great deal. So we're here to share with you our opinion, to share with you our experience, and to say we are working with communities. I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of the government and what their strategy is or isn't, but through the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, through the Center for Ukrainian Studies that Mr. Balan works for, we are doing what we can to work through these issues. But what we're here to say is that this narrative keeps coming up, and it is upsetting to us that politicians and media have bought into it and have not questioned and have sort of gone.
Sorry, Mr. Michalchishyn, you'll forgive me for interrupting you. Next time we meet together, you can interrupt me more often. Chair, I'm going to take that as a no, that the Prime Minister's office has not reached out, that the Speaker's office, the new Speaker's office, has not reached out to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress to attempt to reconcile with what happened, because those two offices bear final responsibility for putting your community in Canada in the crosshairs of, again, a Russian propaganda machine, which is waging war on the diaspora community in Canada as part of the war that they're waging against the people of Ukraine.
Response? Short, quick, brief. Anyone?
I've outlined who has reached out to us. We've had a letter from the speaker apologizing for his role.
Thank you. 5 minutes, 20 seconds. Mrs. Romanado, 5 minutes through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. While I haven't had a chance to meet you in person, it's a pleasure to meet you. You may or may not know that my oldest son deployed to Ukraine in 2018 as part of Op Unifier and helped train Ukrainian forces to defend themselves. So it's a real pleasure to be with you today. With respect to questions on procedure internally, obviously the people best placed to answer those questions are the internal people who we've also been meeting with as well as part of this study. But I wanted to connect with you with respect to your comments about knee-jerk reaction. So I'll walk you through sort of how things happen in the House. Now, as my colleague, Mr. Kmitch, mentioned, this was not a regular sitting of the House. This was a special event in which a dignitary was here. And based on previous testimony from the clerk, we heard that normally in these kind of instances, a member of the visitors gallery would not normally be recognized by the speaker. So this was something that normally is not done, and obviously is something that we're going to look at going forward in terms of protocol. But when that does happen in a regular sitting, the speaker will recognize someone in the gallery, invite members to stand, and we assume that the speaker has done the proper vetting and the person being recognized or people being recognized are worthy. And we're talking moments, second, we stand, we recognize whoever's being recognized by the speaker, and we applaud. And then going through the weekend, we heard the reports coming and the media headlines, and even today, coming to the meeting today, I saw some of the media headlines referencing Mr. Hunka in a different term. And so I wanted to just get feedback from you. How has this hurt the Ukrainian community? And I want to give you an opportunity to help, because we all want to learn from this. And there's also an opportunity to learn about the history of Ukraine's fight during the World War II. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an opportunity to help share that to Canadians watching today, if you'd like to share anything with us.
Yaris, did you want to start?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously there's a long-standing Russian imperial narrative and a Soviet narrative as to Ukraine and Ukrainians that we're struggling against. And so our institute, for instance, studies the history of Ukraine, which is it's a battlefield from beginning to end. And we can't. We're small in number. We have limited resources. We do what we can. One thing that certainly we would welcome is if the federal government wanted to provide some financing to bring together the Ukrainian community, the Jewish community, the Polish community, communities that were affected, to undertake some kind of a reconciliation process. I think that would be welcomed within the community, because right now, I mean. Igor mentioned the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. They're doing their job as best they can with their resources. We are tasked with studying the entirety of Ukrainian history. Ukraine also has to deal with rewriting its own history or telling its own story, because these narratives have been written over Ukrainians for centuries, and they're struggling with gradually challenging and correcting this colonial legacy. So it's a slow process. It's a complicated process. And World War II is just one part of it. We should remember that. But my suggestion would be that if the federal government wanted to provide a push in this direction, I think it'd be welcomed by all the communities, not just by the Ukrainian community.
That's an excellent recommendation. Thank you for that. Mr. I don't want to say your name incorrectly. Mikhalishin? My apologies if I did not say your name properly. Do you have anything that you would like to add with respect to how we can learn from this mistake? And also, if there's any message that you'd like to share with Canadians.
I mean, to back up what Yaris was saying, that the communities have been through Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, through other academic mechanisms, trying to work together. And certainly we have a good working relationship with those communities. And there's only so much that communities can do at a certain level. And as I said, in terms of our desire to work together, for April as a genocide month, in the past we've done much cooperation with all sorts of partners that are involved in that, and we look forward to continuing to work with them.
Thank you. Coming in at 5 minutes, 15 seconds. Madame Goudreau.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And considering my little time, I have just one question, and I hope I can get an answer. We've heard this desire to rehabilitate Ukrainian history and that there is disinformation. I would like to better understand the myths of division of Galicia, and this has been so tenacious for such a long time, and I would like to know your point of view on this.
Could I answer that quickly? I have a box somewhere in my office. As you can see, it's kind of messy, but I have a box of Soviet propaganda leaflets put out in the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s. Booklets, cheaply printed, mass-produced on a whole variety of issues. But World War II is a big one, with many of them with salacious sort of or sensational titles like Nazi werewolves of the SS, whatever, which, like all propaganda, contains a mixture of fact, a mixture of half-truths, and a mixture of out-and-out fabrications and lies. It's hard to sort anything out from them. But money has been invested in this process for decades by the Soviet government and by now the Russian government. And it's something that we have to deal with. It's not easy, again, because the nuances are complicated, the history is complicated, the moral ambiguity. I mean, some Ukrainians point out that, look, the Allies signed an agreement with the Soviets to fight against the Germans. This is after they knew that Stalin was a mass murderer, after the Soviets and the Nazis started the Second World War. But it was in our interest to do that. You can question the morality of it or whatever, but it was done. And that, how come that's okay, but other things aren't? So I think these are issues that need to be looked at in a serious way. And I think that we can move ahead in partnership with the communities that were affected, the Polish community, the Jewish community, other East European, there's the Roma community that also suffered terribly. I'm optimistic that even through this process that things will turn a corner on this.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to drill down a little bit one more time on those lists, I just wanted to get final clarification. Were there any qualifiers or conditions that the PMO placed on the list that you provided in terms of who could be an invitee?
So we were asked to provide community members for an event in Toronto, which we did. And so there is no reason that anybody who would be a donor or a community volunteer or a participant would be excluded from that kind of list.
Okay, great. In terms of that larger disinformation, I mean, we're seeing it across the United States in terms of funding for humanitarian aid. We're worried about that here, absolutely, in Canada. Can you provide us with any further recommendations? I was really glad to get into that, the funds requested for reconciliation. Are there any further recommendations that you have for that broader question of disinformation as we go forward and as part of this study that you can provide to us today?
Yours?
Well, my understanding is there's a commission investigating interference in Canadian elections. I think that's a useful discussion to have because it is going on. And in terms of, could you just refresh my memory on what the first part of your question was.
Oh, just as we're seeing things unfold in the United States and even here in terms of that misinformation, disinformation. But I'm glad that you brought up the Commission on Foreign Interference as well. I appreciate that.
I would just say that, I mean, the Jewish community's got its hands full right now too with what's going on in the Middle East, and I'm sure that this is a distraction in some ways for them too. So we all have an interest in making progress on it.
Yep.
Excellent. With that, I would like to thank you both for taking the time to join us today at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Should something come up that you would like members to consider, please do not hesitate to send it to the clerk, and we'll have it translated in both official languages and circulated around. Your time and attention means a lot to us, and we wish you a good rest of the day. With that, colleagues, I'm going to suspend the meeting. We'll start back up in less than 5 minutes with the second panel. Meeting suspended. Thank you. committee. I had mentioned earlier that this was the first time we were studying this matter, but it actually is the second time, so I was mistaken. And with that, I think we're really excited to have our next panel, who appearing as an individual is a professor, Department of Political Science and Economics with the Royal Military College of Canada, Professor Lubomir Luchak. And then we've also got the Vice President, External Affairs and General Counsel with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, Richard Marceau. And so as we've been kind of working out the calendar, we've had some changes. So my apologies that we have had to reschedule you a couple of times, which means the opening comment times have varied and changed. With that, because we have done that, I will be providing some leniency. And so I will let you, for the most part, go on with your comments. And when you see me start to wave, I would like for them to come to an end. But at the same time, you are our guests, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. So with that, Professor, we'll start with you. The floor is yours. Welcome to Proc.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your time. The title of my presentation is Cui Bono, Who Benefits? I'm not going to read it. I'm going to simply speak to some of the points, but I believe you've all received it in both official languages. At the invitation of the Speaker of the House of Commons, Yaroslav Hunka was present in the House during the visit to Canada of President Volodymyr Zelensky, when it was subsequently reported on left-wing blogs that Mr. Hunka had served in the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, more commonly referred to as the Galicia Division. A controversy erupted which has continued to fester to this day. Now, there are a few things I want to point out right at the start. I don't know Mr. Hunka. I've never met him. Secondly, my mother was kidnapped as a teenager and brought to the Third Reich as a slave laborer during the Second World War. So I have absolutely no interest in defending any Nazi who may still be alive. Let's be very clear about that. I was, however, also a member of the Civil Liberties Commission, representing the Ukrainian Canadian community during the Commission of Inquiry on War Criminals. So I think I'm one of the only people in this room who was there and was part of the investigation that examined the allegations that thousands of Nazi war criminals had somehow managed to get into Canada. I was present in the lockdown with the Minister of Justice, Raymond Hatishin, when he revealed the Commission's findings to the Baltic Jewish and Ukrainian communities. And along with a representative of the Canadian Jewish Congress, Erwin Kotler, whom you all know, I appeared on the CBC program The Journal with Barbara Frum on the 12th of March, 1987, and welcomed the findings of the Deschênes Commission. Now, at that time, our community had a suspicion that Soviet agents and their fellow travelers in their West had provoked this controversy over alleged presence of thousands of Nazi war criminals in North America. Only recently, we have actually come up with a documentary evidence. There was a 1985 KGB document describing something called Operation Payback, which was a disinformation campaign started in the 1970s and intended to stoke tensions between the Jewish, Baltic, and Ukrainian diasporas. That subterfuge worked very well at the time, and it works well to this day. In fact, it is now being deployed to distract attention from Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine and Ukrainians. Now, I'm not going to go into the position of the Ukrainian Canadian community on bringing war criminals to justice. That's already been explained. Unfortunately, Canada has never properly investigated how alleged Soviet and communist war criminals and collaborators managed to get into this country, and some did. Even individuals who openly boasted what they had done on behalf of the Stalinist regime in the ranks of the NKVD, Smersh, and KGB. Government records about all those persons should also now be made available. Now let's look at the evidence with respect to Mr. Hunka. First of all, Mr. Hunka was never a Nazi. He was never a former Nazi. No Ukrainian could ever be a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis, because Ukrainians, like all other Slavs, were considered to be subhumans. They weren't Aryans, they were subhumans, Untermenschen, so they could never be Nazis. Now, every individual who served in the armed forces of the Third Reich during the Second World War, and that's millions of people in total, were obliged to swear an oath to Adolf Hitler. That obviously did not make them all into Nazis, including about 250,000 Germans who immigrated to Canada in the 1950s. Now, indisputably, Mr. Hunka served with the Galicia Division. So why? Why did he enlist? I found a letter in my research that he wrote on the 22nd of September, 2015. So years before there was any controversy about him. And in that, he provides an explanation about why he joined. He volunteered. As a young man, as a teenager in Western Ukraine during the first Soviet occupation of that region between mid-September 1939 and late June 1941, Mr. Hunka witnessed massacres perpetrated by the Soviets against innocent civilians. He witnessed the deportation of family members to Siberia, where some of them died. And so, as he wrote, I learned to hate the Russians. That's what he wrote years ago. Now, he joined, he served to the end of the war. He was interned in Rimini in northeastern Italy after the war, and we'll come to that, back to that in a moment. When the Deschênes Commission in 1985 through 1987 investigated the issue of alleged Nazi war criminals in Canada, it came to a number of specific conclusions about the Galicia Division, which everyone seems to have forgotten. One was that the Galicia Division, should not be indicted as a group. Two, that members of the division had been screened, and indeed they were screened by the British, by the Americans, by the Canadians, including people I personally knew, and even by the Soviets. And charges of war crimes against members of the division were never substantiated. And in the absence of knowledge or evidence of specific war crimes, Mr. Justice Deschênes said mere membership in the Galicia Division is insufficient to justify prosecution. He also concluded that because these people had come to Canada after 1950 with the full knowledge of the government of Canada, Canadian authorities are aware who these men were, they could not have their citizenship revoked because it had been granted to them normally through the naturalization process. What does all that mean with respect to Mr. Hunka? It means simply that he came to Canada legally in 1954. His wartime record with the Galicia Division was well known. No one complained. Now, there were, understandably, and I'm going to underscore that, concerns raised by the Canadian Jewish Congress in 1950, in the autumn of 1950. Who are these people? Why are they being allowed to come to Canada? And in fact, the government at the cabinet level asked the High Commissioner for Canada and the United Kingdom, Eldana Wilgrist, to investigate this. And he did. And he dismissed those allegations about the Galicia Division as being nothing but communist propaganda. And I quote, and he also added in his report to Cabinet, and I quote, "It is interesting to note that no specific charges of war crimes have been made by the Soviet or any other government against any member of this group," end of quote. That rather astute assessment seems to have been forgotten. So, what am I here to do today? As I said, I don't know Mr. Hunka. But when I look at the facts of his life, here's what I find. As a teenager, he fought in defense of Ukraine because of what he had witnessed the Soviets do to Ukrainians between 1939 and 1941. He had nothing to do with the persecution of any minority group. At the war's end, he became a prisoner of war. Later, he became an immigrant, and finally, a naturalized Canadian citizen. He served in the Canadian Army, in the militia from 1963 to 1965, and he swore an oath to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. He worked hard. He raised a family, he paid his taxes, he broke no laws that I'm aware of in Canada, and he contributed for 70 years to the general welfare of his adopted country. And yet, disregarding the principles of natural justice, many members of Parliament, members from all parties, denounced Jaroslav Hunka for being something he never was, a Nazi. The fundamental principle of our justice system, ladies and gentlemen, is that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Given that there is no evidence of any kind, of any wartime criminality on the part of Mr. Hunka's part, I'd like to say that the House of Commons owes an innocent man and our fellow Canadian a public apology. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Marceau, à vous.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, MPs, for having invited me. You'll allow me, Madam Chair, to put this discussion today in a bit of context, because this is important. And the context is a significant increase in anti-Semitism in Canada. Just this week, La Presse published an anti-Semitic caricature which it had to withdraw and apologize for publishing.
Cancel the Jewish Film Festival under pressure. One of your colleagues, NDP MP Brian Mass, had to apologize for his comment in the House linking a ceasefire in Gaza with tackling anti-Semitism here. Toronto Police released its numbers regarding hate and saw a 93% rise of hate crimes in Toronto since October 7th, the majority of which targeting the Jewish community. I could add that the Jewish community had to get an injunction in Montreal to protect its institutions, a community center, a school, a synagogue. And I could talk about the demonstrations against synagogues in Thornhill, in Montreal, and other places. So this is the context, and it is important to notice. Maintenant, de quoi parlons-nous?
Now, what are we talking about here? We're talking about an invitation that was issued to Mr. Jaroslav Unka, a veteran of the Waffen-SS in the World War II. So let us be clear. This was a volunteer unit, so it's not the members of the Richelieu Club. This is a volunteer unit of the Waffen-SS. And the Nuremberg Tribunal said that the Waffen-SS was, on the whole, a criminal organization that had organized the massacres of Jews during World War II. So let us be clear what we are talking about. This man was officially recognized by the House of Commons Speaker, and he received an ovation. And this news circulated around the world. The House of Commons was dirtied by this incident, the presence of this man. And this, of course, served Russian propaganda purposes. Vladimir Putin's purpose was involved in an illegal war against our Ukrainian allies. And this is important for the caucus. So it was embarrassing for Canada in the international arena.
Plea Holocaust survivors, their families, and also hurt Jewish Canadians, and I would say it hurt all Canadians. Maintenant, nous savons.
We know that the Speaker's office did not deliberately invite a former member of the Waffen-SS to the House of Commons. Rather, it was a lack of due diligence.
And a failure of due diligence. However, this is not an isolated incident. In December 2022, a reception was held here in Parliament by the Canada-Palestine Parliamentary Friendship Group, and among the attendees was a man named Nazi Katadba. And who is this Mr. Katadba? Well, he was, at the time at least, the editor of a publication called the Holocaust a Hoax, and referred to Judaism as a terrorist religion. His publication spoke approvingly in 2014 of a synagogue massacre in Jerusalem in which Canadian citizen Chaim Rotman was murdered with an axe while at prayer. And this man, Katadba, no more than Hunka, should have been invited to Parliament. Je répète, le Parlement est...
I repeat, Parliament is the institution that is a cornerstone of Canadian democracy, and it should do better to avoid that such people be invited. We have sent men up onto the moon decades ago. We should be able to do a better job of vetting.
I'm sure we can do a better job vetting people who are welcome into Parliament. I know time flies, Madam Speaker. Nous vous demandons, Madame la Présidente,
we ask you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, to put in place efficient vetting measures so that such incidents don't happen again. We cannot content ourselves with just reacting to incidents, and the most recent incident
sends a terrible message to the Jews of Canada. He was a member of the Waffen-SS. Having people like Katadba in Parliament is also unacceptable. Members of Parliament, what you say in this place matters. What you do in this place matters. Who you let into this place matters. Please, please ensure that similar incidents don't happen again. Merci.
Merci à vous.
And thank you very much.
As per the previous panel, I'm going to ask that one person speak at a time and that we have a respectful dialogue with our guests and between members. And we will do 5-minute rounds again, starting with Mr. Kimmich, followed by Ms. O'Connell, suivi par Madame Gaudreau, et puis Madame Matheson. It will be 5 minutes through the chair, Mr. Kimmich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is the first time I've had a panel where I have actually read both of your books before. Professor Luchuk, I've read Operation Payback and your series of articles you've written on the subject. Et Monsieur Marceau, j'ai lu votre livre.
Mr. Marceau, I have read your book, your history of Jewish history in Quebec.
Different perspectives to the issue. I bring a different perspective as well. So the whole incident that happened in September, I'm sure it was as difficult for your families as it was for mine, because I had a lot of explaining to do to my family on exactly what I knew, when I knew it, and how I knew it. We're not here to relitigate World War II and what happened to the different communities that were given very few choices, and larger forces were at play. And people were deciding for our communities what was to happen, what wasn't to happen. Like, I'm sure you and your families, I have family members who didn't survive the war. I have family members who spent time in camps. What I want to understand is how can we reconcile the communities here, because President Zelensky and President Duda have for years been doing reconciliation work on war crimes that were committed in what Poland calls the borderlands, what would be like the regions around Lviv, Volhynia, Galicia, in Ukraine. So what can we do now going forward to reconcile 3 diaspora communities in Canada? So one, we never embarrass one of our allies again. And most importantly, we never provide the Russian Federation a propaganda win that they can keep using against our ally, Ukraine, and against the diaspora communities in Canada, so this Operation Payback doesn't continue. Perhaps Professor Luchuk could go first, and Monsieur Marceau, deuxième.
I think the kind of efforts that have been made between the presidents of Poland and Ukraine are to be commendable, and they have continued, and they will continue. I know that there are colleagues of mine in Ukraine who are working on these very issues. And as was stated earlier, having academics and scholars take a second look and think about things based on archival evidence, not on emotion, is a very good thing and a welcome thing. So that's happening in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe more generally. Today, one of Ukraine's greatest friends, as we all know, is Poland, as well as Canada, in terms of supplying Ukraine with the kind of support it needs to fend off the invading Russians. I think in Canada, what we all need to do is, as was stated earlier, take a second look. What happened to Mr. Hunka? Where is the evidence that he was guilty of anything other than membership in the Galicia Division? And he explained how, as a teenager, watching his family members being deported to Siberia, where some were murdered, going into prisons in Western Ukraine, in Berezhany, in the latter part of June 1941, and seeing mutilated women. I'm not going to go into the descriptions. They're in my brief. They're pretty grotesque. How can we, in 2024, say that what a teenager saw and then did out of hatred for the people who did it is wrong, particularly when there's no evidence that he himself was involved in any kind of war crime or crime against humanity? So,
sorry, Chair. Sorry, Mr. Professor Luchuk. I have time, and I just want Mr. Marceau to jump in so I can get a response and ask you the next question.
So thank you very much for the question. My late wife was of Jewish-Polish origin. And a few years ago, I got a call from the Polish embassy they wanted to award me the Order of Merit of the Republic of Poland for work that I did regarding the maintenance of the Auschwitz camp, so that it stays as a monument to men's inhumanity to men. I asked my wife then, should I accept it? And she said, absolutely. That is one step towards reconciliation, and do this and continue the work of reconciliation with the Polish community and Poland. And then I did. Those little gestures, I think, matter. In Canada, I would say that the relationship between the Ukrainian and the Jewish community, despite the troubled past, is actually quite good. Both Ukraine and the Jewish community, both Ukrainian community and the Jewish community are facing a crisis now. I'll be very, very short. I can tell you that when Russia started its war, the Jewish community mobilized to help welcome refugees from Poland, from Ukraine. We're grateful for the support that the community has given to the Jewish community now, and I think this is the kind of work that we should work on to build on.
Thank you so much. Okay, so our time is very limited, and we like the substance, but I would just ask that we try to be... Madame O'Connell, 5 minutes to you through the chair.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Professor Lucic, I wanted to talk about, my colleague here, Mr. Kimmich, just said, and I wrote it down, quote, "We never provide a propaganda win for Russia again." However, thinking back to what happened, what preceded after Mr. Hunka's gallery appearance, the conduct and the conduct in the House by conservatives, all parties in fairness, but for conservative members now to suggest you can't provide Russian propaganda with a win when in fact some of their own tweets and responses were actually used by Russia to further propaganda. And I can only imagine also how hurtful and harmful that is to the Jewish community to see that heightened, and certainly Holocaust survivors. So could you speak to the propaganda that was actually perpetrated by the House reaction by some members more than others that actually were used by Russia?
I can say that I had a friend, Stefan Petulitsky, 154922 was his Auschwitz tattoo number. I helped him prepare his memoirs for publication, and they're now available. And so I heard a great deal about what happened at Auschwitz and by whom and to whom. And from people like that and the people I interviewed for my doctoral dissertation, I learned not to pick sides. And so I'm not going to pick sides on that question. I will say that I was disappointed as a Canadian of Ukrainian heritage by the reaction of many members in the House of Commons from all parties. And I have a list of quotations here from every party, I made sure. I'm not going to read those into the record, but the point is, it was a knee-jerk reaction. You were all on a high because President Zelensky had come here, and we all recognize him as Ukraine's Moses. This is a man who's leading his people, his nation, the Ukrainian nation, himself of Jewish heritage, out of Russian Soviet bondage. This is what he's doing, and this is why Putin's pushing back so hard. Putin's the pharaoh. He's just made himself immortal in terms of the quote-unquote election. He's going to be there longer than Stalin. So we have a Ukrainian president who's here. You all welcomed him. You all applauded him. And in that euphoria, a man was introduced from North Bay in a wheelchair, wearing an embroidered Ukrainian shirt, who just wanted to see his president, for whom he fought in the sense that he fought for Ukraine's independence. And then the next day, the left-wing press got onto it and said, oh, he's an SS man, and then people ran with it. There wasn't a single media report that I could find that took a different position. Not one. There wasn't a single member of parliament who paused and thought and said, maybe I should read a book. Maybe I should think about this. Now, most of you are a lot younger than me. And the reality of it is, you might not know these things, but everyone rushed to condemn because it's so easy to say SS man, Nazi. Someone even elevated him to an SS officer. I mean, he got promoted by the MP who said that. Mr. Juncker was never a Nazi. There's no evidence he did anything wrong. He's an innocent Canadian, and yet he was condemned. And he was condemned by people in every party. So please, drop the partisan part of this. How do you get beyond this? And that was part of both of your questions. You get beyond this by thinking before you speak. You get beyond this by not falling prey to Soviet disinformation regurgitated by the Russian Federation and their operatives in Canada and their fellow travelers, of whom there are more than a few. They're very good at this, and they suckered you.
Just a question following that line. We're seeing the propaganda increase. We're starting to see now a campaign on Facebook and others. They're starting to say, just got my taxes done in Canada. I owe Ukraine $14,000. Do you see the harmful rhetoric being incurred against, sorry, Professor Lucic, just following on your last comment, the harmful rhetoric that is increasing in this country on Russian propaganda?
Yes, both in the United States and in Canada, these kinds of reactions are occurring, and they're very harmful. Ukraine is literally fighting against the genocidal agenda of the KGB man in the Kremlin, and we need to do everything we can to support Ukraine now because Ukraine is fighting for the free world. And I think we all know that. Conservatives, liberals, New Democrats, Green Party, we all know that. So support Ukraine. Don't fall for Soviet Russian disinformation.
Two things can be true at the same time. Yes, there's Russian propaganda. Yes, Ukraine is fighting for its life. A man was also honored in Parliament who was a member of the Waffen-SS.
Thank you. Madame Goudreau.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said earlier, our committee wants to understand. We want to shed light on issues because never again do we want this to happen again. So I cannot, go over all of Parliament's past experience, but based on what is being said, I would like to hear suggestions. I'm very convinced that our witnesses have suggestions. Mr. Marceau, what should we do? First is take responsibility. As an institution, the House of Commons must assume its responsibility, and in that I include the MPs themselves, as well as the House administration. When invitations are issued to individuals, there needs to be a process, a vetting process. That's essential. Second, when an MP invites individuals from their riding, for instance, for a reception, for instance, that MP must see to it that those invitees are individuals that will not harm Parliament as an institution. So we have the example of Mr. Juncker and the other example I referred to earlier that caused a great deal of embarrassment for the House of Commons. There's a way to research individuals, do background checks, even with Google, to see to it that these individuals don't have a past or even a problematic present, because when this incident occurs, it's all of the Parliament that suffers the consequences. So I hold this House in very high esteem. And for those who believe in democracy, we shouldn't have to experience these incidents. Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I've seen today is that there is no historic consensus on the issue. So how to make up one's mind? I'm not a historian. So how can we reconcile two such tragic narratives? I'd like to hear from you on that.
Any other discipline has schools of thought and different opinions. You need to base yourself on evidence. Mere membership in the Galicia Division, as Justice Deschênes concluded back in 1987, is insufficient for prosecution. Membership in the Galicia Division is not a crime, according to Justice Deschênes. These people were screened. There's been no evidence put forward that someone like Mr. Hunka that we're talking about committed any crimes. And yet my colleague has suggested, well, this man shouldn't have been in Parliament. Why? Why not? Because he was a member of the Galicia Division. Well, okay, so there's a difference of opinions there. But the fact is, we've had a commission of inquiry established by the Government of Canada, which continued for nearly 2 years. It was a very difficult period of time, I can assure you. The Canadian Jewish Congress, B'nai B'rith, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, were all represented there, had standing before that commission, and we welcomed the results. So 37 years later, you can't say you don't like the results. And you can't say, this Canadian can't come to Parliament because I disagree with his opinions, or this Canadian can't come to Parliament because I find him disagreeable. Just going on Google or Wikipedia and searching for information is pretty fraught, I would think. I'm not sure you'd invite me.
Madame la Présidente, j'aimerais vraiment.
I apologize. I would like to hear from Mr. Marceau. I would like to recall that no later than just a few days away, there was in a Ukrainian cemetery, the Saint Volodymyr cemetery confirmed, and this an agreement in the Jewish community and the Ukrainian community, that this monument was removed. So even within the two communities, there are still very long-dated historic differences.
May I speak to that, Madam Chair?
That's short.
The removal of a cemetery monument on private property in Oakville a few days ago was removed because it had been vandalized repeatedly by unknown individuals. The cemetery board unfortunately capitulated to criminal vandalism. And I'm sorry, that's not an agreement.
Thank you. Ms. Matheson.
Thank you. Mr. Marceau, so you talked about that vetting process in terms of who's allowed into Parliament and so on. And in the first meeting that we had on this study, it was made very clear by all those involved with security and protocol and so on that was not done. The speaker did his own thing. They didn't see it didn't go through the proper channels. Obviously, we need to determine that needs to be corrected as a protocol, despite who was involved. But you also talked about that meeting by the Palestinian Friendship Group and letting somebody in. I too was very upset that occurred, not wanting to allow that kind of access. My question is, there are a lot of events on the Hill. They are held by members of Parliament. They are held by groups. They are held by organizations such as CIJA themselves. So who do you think, in your opinion, how do we truly do a good job of vetting when there are so many things happening? Is that solely upon the government? Is that solely upon our own security personnel? Is that to be a responsibility of the groups that are running these events as well? How do you think that should play out?
No group can hold a reception here without having being sponsored by a member of Parliament. So the member of Parliament who's sponsoring a reception holds part of the responsibility of who comes in. That is why this event that you referred to was the fact that you had a Holocaust denier that was invited was very problematic. Now, they are, with all due respect, to this committee and to every member of parliament, what I said earlier, I really, really, really meant it. What you do in this place matters. What you say in this place matters. And Ms. Madison, I have to say that when you stand in the House with a pendant of Palestine that erases the state of Israel.
Madam Chair, that is not. Madam Chair,
it is felt by the Jewish community.
Madam Chair,
I'm going
you
to
were very
pause.
specific.
I'm going to pause. Once again. For the third time today. It's a very tough conversation. It's a very difficult conversation. I provide a lot of leniency. But it's very clear as to why we are here. And so, Mr. Marceau, respectfully, I provided leniency within your comments. I do hear when people say, how is this relevant? But as guests, I do provide some leniency. But the way this place works, and that's why we're trying to make it better, but it is a member's time. And a member will ask questions, and guests who are invited to come answer those questions to the best of their ability. And that's how it works here. And we can try to improve this institution, we are all for it. But the member's question is what needs to be addressed, and that's why we're here. That's the invitation that was received, and that's the invitation we're acting upon. So, please, I ask all of you, I know we want to finish this round in its completion, which means the Conservatives and the Liberals will get another few minutes at the end. I would like to not interrupt again. I'm giving the floor back to Ms. Matheson.
I did ask a very specific question in terms of how we make that vetting process better in relation to your specific testimony. So I ask that you respectably limit your comments to that vetting process.
I'm nothing to add.
Could I add something at that point? If I could add something to that, I think using open sources is a very difficult way of adjudicating who might be allowed into Parliament. We all know people who we disagree with or who we find disagreeable. And so open sources which are polluted with misinformation are not a good way of keeping someone in or out. I would be very upset. I mean, I could see people looking me up and saying, no, we don't want him, right? Because there are some people who disagree with the opinions I've taken on a number of issues. So am I acceptable? And again, I say, Mr. Hunka, who's never been charged with anything, could he come back tomorrow as one of your guests? You're suggesting he can't. Why not? What has he done? So the vetting process, and my colleague just whispered in my ear, Waffen-SS, well, read the Deschênes Commission report. I think you were a teenager when I was standing in front of Deschênes. And, you know, if you read the report, he addresses the issue of the Waffen-SS in Nuremberg, which did not mention the Galicia division specifically at any rate. So I think we need to understand that Parliament has to hear disagreeable opinions, has to hear from people who you may find disagreeable. That's your job. And then you make your decisions. And I agree with my colleague, what is said matters and what you decide matters. But you have to hear and you have to read.
Excellent. With 10 seconds left, are you okay if I... 10 seconds.
If Mr. Marceau has anything further to add.
No, I mentioned the importance of properly vetting.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will just say when it comes to these kind of conversations, and whether it's whispering amongst our guests' ears or whatever else, if we can just go through the chair, it would be the best. And I would appreciate that be the case because it will help maintain the decorum and what we need to do here today. With that, Mr. Kimmich.
How much time do I have, Madam Chair?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay, I will try to be judicious with my time. I think the question is who should get recognized in Parliament, who should not. You can invite all types of people. And then I think the second part of the issue this committee has been tasked with is figuring out how do we go about after fixing the reputation of Canada, fixing the reputation that we damage. So as a group, as a collective, because of the actions of the Speaker and the lack of actions by the Office of the Prime Minister, we've damaged President Zelensky's reputation, and we allowed him to be then used by Russian propaganda to go after him. We've talked about sources. The Polish Institute of National Remembrance, the Commission for the Presence of Crimes Against the Polish Nation, found that the village of Huta Pieniacka was indeed, there was a massacre committed. The 14th was involved. 100,000 Polish people, there was ethnic cleansing done against them, which is why the Polish community is so sensitive to how this is sought. And that is a national commission that has been found to have had the right facts. The findings have been confirmed by the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine in 2005. So we can talk about Wikipedia. That's one thing. You can Google things. These are national commissions. And what we do here in Canada in our sources, it's our particular context. We should look to the two nations closest to a country that they are now fighting directly in one case, Ukraine, and indirectly in the case of Poland, to ensure that both remain free. And I've said that before, you cannot have a free Ukraine without a free Poland. You cannot have a free Poland without a free Ukraine, and you will never have a home safe enough for the Jewish people in that region without both of those countries being free, where you are free to be a Jew who speaks Hebrew or Yiddish proverbs, which I love very much from my grandmother. So how do we move beyond this to fix the reputation of Canada and our parliament here so we can be a benefit to our ally in Ukraine? So I've asked that question of others as well. So what are the specific actions we can take to fix the Prime Minister's office mistake, the Speaker's mistake for reconciliation? If we keep it short, because I have one more, I'm going to cut you off in like a minute and a half. Monsieur Marceau, si vous voulez aller en premier.
Merci. Alors,
Thank you.
on politicians. This part is not only members of parliament, it is the duty of Canadians, be they the Ukrainian descent, Polish descent, of Jewish descent, to work together to see that we cannot relitigate the past. And we obviously have deep differences of opinion here around this table. But that said, there's already work being done between the Polish community, the Ukrainian community, and the Jewish community. And this work has to be encouraged by members of parliament, but it has to be sui generis. It has to be from the communities themselves. And I would put to you, Mr. Kimmich, that this is a work that the respective communities want to do. Now, in terms of repairing the work that the damage that has been done, is to ensure that something like this does not happen again. And that part is actually on this institution, on members of parliament, and on the administration of this place.
And I would simply add to that you in this committee are doing just that. You are restoring the reputation of Canada by examining these questions and allowing us to disagree with each other on some points, and to do it in front of you, and you listen to us, and you'll go away and you'll think about it. I've suggested that you might want to apologize to Mr. Hunka. I have no expectation that you will, but the reality of it is that's now part of the record as well. As for Ukraine, I can fairly much assure you that President Zelensky is not worrying about the Hunka incident right now. He has far more important things to do with his time, and thanks to all of you in all the parties who have been supporting Ukraine. That's the key thing right now, support Ukraine. Who benefits from this distraction? The Soviets/Russian Federation now. They're the ones that benefited from all of this. They're the ones that have run with this and perpetuated it for months.
So thank you, Professor Lushuk. I see the chair about to return. I have a motion to move, Madam Chair, because I want to thank the two witnesses who've been here and shared their wisdom with us. But this is the last meeting before April 1st. And my dear colleague, the Member of Parliament, Michael Cooper, had put forward a motion, so I'm moving it, that the committee, pursuant to Standing Order 108.3C3, report to the House that, in its opinion, the unelected Senate has unacceptably amended Bill C-234, an act to amend the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, which would provide carbon tax relief for Canadian farmers and, by extension, all Canadians, given the ancient financial privileges of the House of Commons, which are rooted in the Constitution of Canada and with particular relevance to Bill C-234, are expressed in part in Standing Order 80. And just opening quotation here, it is the undoubted right of the House to direct, limit, and appoint in all such money bills the ends, purposes, considerations, conditions, limitations, and qualifications of such grants which are not alterable by the Senate. And that the committee, A, recommend that a message be sent to the Senate to acquaint their honors accordingly, and B, call on the House to reject the Senate amendments to Bill C-234. Notice was given of this motion on Friday, March 15, 2024, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I am just going to, I hear you. I know what the rules are. Thank you all. We have guests, which I would like to dismiss. There is other people who had questions. And I find this, that I've been quite clear that you were going to have another round, which you could have let other members have their questions in, and then you could have moved it because I was going to give you the floor again. I stated that you would get another round. And so I feel like that could have been courteous because we did not only have guests come, but we've bumped them multiple times.
Point of order.
Yes?
Madam Chair, I ended my speech. I am not speaking anymore. If you're, I'd be happy to, if you want to proceed to whoever's on the list and call the question afterwards.
So you're just giving notice of it, or are you?
I moved the motion, but I'm not going to be speaking to it further.
Motion on the floor.
Listen, Mr. Duncan. The floor, you're done speaking to it? Ms. O'Connell. Okay, can I just release the witnesses, or do we think, I just want to say, are we doing this? Because I'd like to release the witnesses.
This will be short.
You guys get to watch the show. Welcome to Procedure and House Affairs. Ms. O'Connell.
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn debate. And I'll ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded division. Ms. Clerk.
Madame Fortier.
Yes. Yes.
Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
Ms. Romanato.
Oui.
Mr. DeGood.
Yes.
Mr. Erskine Smith.
Yes.
Mr. Calkins.
No.
Mr. Kmitch.
No.
Mr. Duncan.
No.
Mr. Berthold.
No.
Madame Gaudreau.
No.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Debate is adjourned. All right. Your time is up, so I'll go to Ms. Fortier. 5 minutes through the chair.
Merci. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. We'd like to come back to the issues that I had prepared for. I believe that you have shed light on the fact that we have a very complex situation before us, and we would not like this situation to repeat itself. One of the things I heard you say, Mr. Marceau, there was a lack of due diligence and vetting. And I would like to go into that further. We're trying to see, with the procedures we have, how we can do better in the future. And one of the things I've asked myself is, was it the invitation or that he was recognized in the House? Because with the procedures we have, I wonder, even with having issued the invitation to the person we are speaking of, I think what is really an issue is that he was acknowledged in the gallery. So what do we do to not repeat this kind of situation? Really, it's the acknowledgement of the individual in the gallery. Perhaps the vetting or the due diligence you mentioned could be elaborated on. And then I would like to hear from Mr. Lushuk as well. Thank you, Ms. Fortier, for that question. I think there are several levels. First, there is just the attendance, but then there is the recognition, the acknowledgement. So for the attendance, I think it's the House of Commons administration, but also each member's responsibility and members' offices to make sure that anyone invited to the parliamentary precinct is someone that will not cause this kind of process. I know that you are all busy. I know that your staff are overrun, underpaid, and they're certainly not, but perhaps we could focus on improvements. First, MPs need to do a part of the vetting. Second, the names need to be submitted to the House of Commons administration, and then the security people of the administration make sure that these individuals won't cause a problem. As to the recognition, the level of screening needs to be even more sophisticated, because I don't think there is any greater tribute to have in this House than to be recognized by the Speaker of the House. So there is a responsibility on the part of the Speaker to see to it that the individual who is being honored not be the kind of person we're talking about today. So Mr. Luchak?
Appeared nowhere on the internet until after the incident. So I'm not sure how anyone Googling him or looking for him online would have found anything. When the controversy erupted, suddenly a very sophisticated Wikipedia page appeared about the Hunka scandal, or whatever they called it, which I think originated in Qatar, which we know is, of course, is a hotbed of historical studies in Ukraine in World War II. Clearly, it's a fabricated page made to continue the controversy. So how could anyone vet someone like Yaroslav Hunka? He's a completely innocent Canadian who's committed no crime. So if you looked on police records or security records, RCMP records, what would you have found? Nothing. A 98-year-old man in a wheelchair, a taxpayer, a family man, a man who served in the Canadian military for 2 years in the militia. I mean, he has a perfect record in Canada, 70 years of it. So what would you have vetted? Now, the fact is, as I say, some people, for physical security, of course, if someone's threatened Parliament or threatened a member of Parliament, that person should not be allowed into this house. Absolutely. But this is the people's house. You can't suddenly just have your staffers decide who gets in because they found something on the internet. Are you kidding? If you go on the internet, I'm sure you all do. I know you all do. There's so much garbage there. And you're going to use that to vet Canadians?
Parce que moi, je veux ramener des recommandations.
Because I would like to make recommendations. So I think it is the job of the Speaker of the House. What you're saying is there needs to be better methods used to be able to identify people, and especially if they're going to be honored or a tribute is going to be paid them. That is correct. Of course, the resources to be able to do that are necessary. Thank you.
Madame Goudreau.
I have another comment. I have been thinking, we are thinking about these issues because we want to formulate recommendations. Now, given the issue we have here, which is to seek out information, I wonder, what do you think about a committee working with the House administration, the protocol people, the Speaker, and maybe a member of each party? And this to avoid that an incident where, such as what we experienced doesn't happen again. Might that be a recommendation our committee could make? It's a valid proposal, providing those around the table have the resources to be able to do the job. You are already overwhelmed, running from one committee to another, from the chamber to your ridings. So I understand the limitations that you have, even just as human beings. So I would add, if you will allow me, that we would add the security services representatives as well.
Is, I think, something that you are already capably protected by the people like the Sergeant at Arms and his staff. I think vetting people by a star chamber comprised of members of Parliament and others, again, it's just too easy to see this working against the interests of Canadians. Adding another layer of bureaucracy, adding another layer of staff. This comes with costs. I think, again, I'll say this, I've said it before, you have to listen to people that you find disagreeable and with whom you disagree. You disagree around this table. I've just watched it. Okay? And so that's part of your job. You may find that there'll be people coming to the House of Commons who some people find objectionable, but you invite them because they have a point of view that you want to hear. And so I don't think that unless there is a physical threat to a member of Parliament or a senator or the House more generally, that you should keep anyone out. However, should you acknowledge them, that's a different thing.
Thank you. So, considering, Madam Chair, And in light of everything we've heard, I think we will be able to make recommendations. This is a very sensitive topic. We do not want to see it happen again. Thank you.
Matheson.
So clearly, and I know that this is a bit of a provincial issue because provinces determine educational components of what they teach. But clearly, there's not that comprehensive education about World War II in many different ways. So do you believe that, or what do you believe that we need to do better to create that awareness, to have that better education within our schools, and what can our federal government help to do in terms of that? I mean, I know that there's the commissioner on anti-Semitism, and there are things in the works in terms of providing those greater educational components. But if you could add your thoughts on that, that would be great.
So I think it goes further than in school. I think the vast majority of Canadians before Russia's invasion of Ukraine had no idea of the Holodomor. The systemic creation of famine to kill millions of Ukrainians. Like Canadians did not know that, and how the Ukrainian community here was impacted by this. Similarly, the number of people, especially young people, have no idea about the Holocaust and how it came about and what flew from the Holocaust, which is the creation of all the international infrastructure of protection of human rights and all of this stuff. So yes, schools have to do a better job. The province of Ontario, for example, made Holocaust education mandatory. That is good. I think that different other genocides that have happened, the Holodomor, the Rwandan genocide, the Armenian genocide, and others have to be better taught to not only school, not only kids, but all Canadians. And that is why, and the executive director of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress mentioned the work that's been done after this House adopted the April as the Genocide Remembrance and Prevention Month. There's a lot of work being done, among other things, between the Ukrainian and the Jewish community, but other communities as well. And this is a type of, I guess, public awareness stuff that where you, as members of parliament and the federal government, has a role to play.
Short.
As an old professor, all I can say is that unfortunately people don't read anymore. And without reading, depending only on the internet for your information, gives us nothing but grief. And I'm seeing that in my classes at the Royal Military College. I saw it at Queen's. I saw it at U of T. I've seen it around the world when I've lectured. People don't read, and because they don't read, they go to the internet, they get their information from that, and it's usually polluted. So I'm afraid no amount of money is going to change that at this point.
Thank you. I'm glad you were able to experience our Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I'm really glad that you were able to take time. If you think of anything else, send it to the clerk. We'll have it translated in both official languages and shared around. With that, have a great day. Meeting adjourned.